G'day everyone, this is just a reminder that we've got until the end of February to provide feedback to Canada Bay Council on their proposal to rip out the cycleway in Heath Street. Now you can go to their Collaborate Now page and leave a comment, and I'll put a link in the description. Now this is part of a series of videos that we've done on saving the cycleway, and if you haven't seen any of the previous ones, there'll be a link to the playlist at the end of this video. Now this video is going to focus on dooring and how putting in a cycleway can avoid this. And I was unfortunately doored the other day by a passenger when riding in a painted bike lane. And I've uploaded that video to Upride, and you can look at it there if you want to, because the Upride version includes the swearing, whereas the YouTube version doesn't. Now, as we walk through these slides, I want you to think about two things. Firstly, what's the likelihood of a collision occurring between a cyclist and a vehicle? And secondly, what's the impact going to be? What's the injury severity going to be? Because the harder the impact, the worse it's going to be for someone. Are you going to walk away from a crash, or are you going to get carted away in an ambulance? So, before the cycleway, what did we have? Okay, you were riding up the hill in the road, in the traffic lane, and there was always a risk of a driver opening a door into you as you rode up the hill. And that's not a good thing to happen, because doors have a tendency to only want to open so far and no further. And look, yes, if you're driving up the road and somebody flings their door open in front of you and you hit that door with your car, it's going to fling the door around and snap the hinges and all the rest of it, make a real mess of your car. But a human doesn't have it's the same crunchiness of a car and the same mass and the same velocity. So, in my experience, you hit a car door, you squish, it doesn't move very much, you hurt a lot. So, that was always the risk of going up Heath Street, is that it's a 12% gradient, it's steep. Sure, there's some people belting up the hill really fast, but most people are going up reasonably slowly, and you get very impatient drivers behind you. So there's always this, there's the safety need to stay out in the lane a metre away from the car so you don't get doored. At the same time, having impatient, angry drivers behind you, unable to get around you. So of course, what a lot of people do is hug the parked cars and risk getting doored, and that's a bad thing to happen. So really, we need to be staying about a metre out from the edge of the car in order to be safe. And of course, if a driver does the right thing and they look in their mirror, or they look in the mirror and turn their head over their right shoulder, they're going to see you coming up the hill, and they're not going to open their door in front of you. But it happens way too often because people are lazy. They're messing around, getting their phone or their coffee or their purse or their cigarettes or their briefcase or whatever it is, and they just, they're focused on that stuff and getting hold of it, and they just fling the door open in front of you and down you go. Right. We put in a cycleway. What happens? Well, in this case, there are nice wide concrete blocks marking the edge of the cycleway. And, you can try this at home. Go and open the door of your car, get out a tape measure, and see how far it extends outwards. And it's probably going to be somewhere between about 70 centimetres and a metre when fully opened. And you also need to think of a person then exiting that door quickly. Are they going to go out beyond the edge of the door? And the answer usually is yes. So you might, in fact, impact with a person coming out of the car rather than the door itself. Doesn't really matter. But look, what we're looking at here is if a driver is scraping their wheels up against the white concrete blocks and a passenger opens the door, it's going to extend a little bit out past the edge of the concrete block into the cycleway. If they're parked a reasonable distance out from the curb, then chances are the door is actually not going to clear the concrete block. So if you are riding to the left of the middle of the cycleway, or even in the middle of it, the chances of you getting clipped by a passenger door are extremely remote. You need the old Swiss cheese model. You need a couple of things to happen here in order for you to get doored. Firstly, you need a driver to park right up against the concrete blocks. And second, you need to be hugging the concrete blocks, your pedals just about clipping the concrete block. And look, if you're riding in that situation, well, it's not probably the most sensible thing to do. Yeah, you're putting yourself at risk of being doored. But, so the likelihood of that kind of thing happening, I think, is pretty low. So, it's really not going to happen. Now, look, we can think of what it's like with a bidirectional cycleway. And this is what we have over in Burke Street, actually, north of Oxford Street. So they put in a bidirectional cycleway on the western side of Burke Street. And as you ride up the hill, you're actually riding against the flow of the traffic, so to speak. And that way, if a passenger opens their door into you, and it does extend out far enough for you to actually impact it, the severity of that crash is going to be a lot lower because firstly, you're going up a hill, so you're not going to be going that fast unless you're zooming up on an e-bike that's, had the governor taken off it. But secondly, the door is naturally going to close because that's what the doors are designed to do. Now, you might, bounce off and end up crashing onto the road or onto the footpath, or the cycleway, because you've been unbalanced. And it's actually going to be the secondary impact of you hitting the concrete that's going to hurt rather than you impacting with the door. And also the dopey passenger who's opened their door is, possibly going to be hurt as a door gets flung back into them, possibly with some force. But you'd have to say, how likely is that to happen when a passenger has this great big windscreen in front of them? They don't have to look in their mirror. All they need to do is look out of the windscreen and pay attention and see if there's anyone cycling towards them. And yes, they might have a dirty grade A pillar that need to wiggle their head to look around, but they can avoid a collision by simply looking around the A pillar and paying attention. But let's think about these from a risk matrix perspective. And, on the top axis, we've got impact, and on the vertical axis, we've got likelihood. So look, we start off at the beginning. This is a thing the residents are worried about, which is a car-on-car crash. And if you think about it, a car-on-car crash before the cycleway was constructed was probably unlikely to happen. It could still happen, but with cars parked on either side, limited visibility and all that kind of thing, it was possible that a collision would happen. But if the cars are moving slow enough, the impact is going to be low to medium. Okay, you might end up with a dented panel and stuff like that, but is there going to be an injury to the occupants of the vehicles in that situation? And unless the car going up the hill is going pretty fast, the answer is no. You've got airbags and you've got seat belts and all, pretensioners and all that kind of good stuff. Crush zones in the car. You might be shaken up, but you're not going to be injured. At most you might end up with a bit of bruising. But what about if a cyclist gets doored? Well, when they're riding up the hill. So what we're worried about there is a car-on-human crash before the cycleway goes in. And we know that dooring happens pretty regularly, so the likelihood, it's possible to likely. And the severity of that is going to be medium-high to high because you've got a human hitting essentially an immovable object, and it's going to hurt, and they may go down, and we've had a number of instances in Sydney where a car following the cyclist has then run the cyclist over after they've fallen off their bike and impacted on the roadway. And it was actually getting run over by a following vehicle, which killed them, not the actual impact with the door. So that's why I'm saying the severity of impacting a door can be very high, and it's not just Sydney, it's happened in Melbourne as well. So what does our situation look like once we put the cycleway in? So what we can see is you may increase the likelihood of a car-on-car crash from unlikely to possible, but the impact is still going to be low-medium because it's still presumably going to be a low-impact crash. And in fact, that impact severity may drop to low because the narrowing of the road reduces vehicle speeds. So a crash which previously might have happened at 30 kilometers an hour might happen at 20. Still a crash, it's still really annoying, but it's a fender bender rather than a person being injured. Now, what about the car on human crash once the cycleway is built? Well, look, firstly, you've massively reduced the likelihood of a dooring incident happening for all the reasons we've just been through. But if one does happen, the impact is also reduced because of you don't have a risk of a vehicle coming up behind you and running you over and severely damaging you or killing you. You're just going to hit the door, it's going to hurt, you're going to fall into the cycleway, landing on the concrete is probably going to hurt. But the chances of breaking something and being carted off in an ambulance are much, much lower. So this needs to be weighed up. Like we said, we may have slightly increased the likelihood of a car-on-car crash, but the impact is low to low medium. But we have massively reduced the likelihood of a car-on-human crash, and we've massively reduced the severity. So that's why we need to keep the cycleway. Now, if people are more worried about bending cars than damaging humans, then we've got a real issue on our hands with the way people think. But that's a story for another day.